He had it all: success, fortune, and a life built on certainty. But one rainy turn down a quiet country road changed everything. When a mysterious woman wearing a familiar pendant appeared, forgotten memories began to resurface, leading him on a heart-wrenching journey to uncover a truth buried for 30 years. This isn't just a story about reunion. It's about fate, loss, and the powerful bond between a mother and son that refused to be broken. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and share what it meant to you. Now, let's jump into the story. The rain had been steady all morning, soft and gray, the kind that turned the air cold and made small towns feel even smaller. Lavender Road, just outside the village of Amberfield, was slick with water and fallen leaves. Puddles reflected the cloudy sky and the headlights of a silver SUV cutting around a narrow bend. Inside the car, Nolan Green gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. He checked the time. 1:47 p.m. He was late for a client pitch in the city, a presentation his team had spent weeks preparing, but his GPS had rerouted him through Amberfield after an accident closed the main highway. Now he was stuck behind a slow-moving tractor and irritated by the countryside crawling past his windows. Nolan was known in his world for sharp suits, sharper ideas, and an unshakable sense of control. He had built a life of precision, with no time for detours or distractions. His work as an architect was about clean lines and order, nothing messy, nothing unexpected. But the road had different plans. As he rounded another curve, he barely noticed the figure on the side of the road until it was too late. The cart came into view first, wooden and old, filled with wildflowers in mason jars. Then the woman appeared, gray-haired, hunched slightly forward, pushing the cart across the wet road. The SUV skidded. Tires screeched against the asphalt. The brake pedal slammed to the floor. Thud. The sound was dull, but it hit Nolan like a thunderclap. He sat frozen for a moment, his hands shaking. Then he opened the door and stepped into the cold drizzle. Marjorie Ellis stood beside her overturned cart, stunned but upright. Wildflowers were scattered across the pavement, some crushed beneath the tires, their petals torn. Her hands trembled as she tried to collect them, ignoring the fresh scrape along her elbow. Nolan's voice came out sharper than he intended. "You shouldn't have been in the road." Marjorie looked up slowly, her eyes pale blue and strangely steady. "The wheel got stuck," she said softly. "I didn't see you coming so fast." Nolan exhaled through his nose and looked at the dented front bumper of his car. The paint was chipped. It would cost a small fortune to repair. He checked his watch again. "I have an important meeting," he muttered, mostly to himself. Marjorie knelt beside her cart, picking up one of the jars and placing a handful of salvaged blooms inside. Her movements were slow and careful. Her dress was faded, the hem damp with rain. A chain glinted around her neck, barely visible beneath her shawl. Nolan stared at it. His heart skipped. A small pendant hung there, oval-shaped, tarnished silver, its edge jagged like it had been broken from another half. The pattern on it, a tree split in two, looked exactly like the one he had as a child. The one he'd kept hidden in a drawer for years. The one he remembered clutched in small hands during nights filled with cries he couldn't explain. "Where did you get that necklace?" His voice was flat, but his chest was tight. Marjorie's hand instinctively covered the pendant. "Why do you ask?" "Because I had one just like it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain fell softly around them. Then Marjorie said, It's an old keepsake. I've had it since before I came to Amberfield. It's personal. Nolan crouched to her level, the wet gravel soaking through his tailored pants. May I see it? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she held the pendant out for him to look. She didn't remove it, just tilted her chin so he could get a closer view. Nolan reached out and touched the edges with his fingertips. The design, the shape, the break. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. He stood abruptly, his pulse loud in his ears. "What's your name?" "Marjorie Ellis." The name meant nothing to him. Yet something inside him shifted, like a door creaking open in the dark. Marjorie bent again, wincing slightly. "I need to get these flowers to the event in town," she said. "They let me set up outside the community center. Helps me get by." Nolan ran a hand through his damp hair. "Do you live nearby?" "A small cottage down this road," she said. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "I'm staying at the Amberfield Inn for the next 2 days. We need to talk about that pendant and the accident." Marjorie took the card without looking at it. "I have nothing else to give you, sir, and I can't pay for any damage to your car." "We'll figure something out," Nolan said, backing toward the SUV. Before stepping inside, he added, "Don't mention that pendant to anyone else." He drove away quickly, water splashing up from the tires. But he kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Marjorie was shrinking into the distance, a small figure surrounded by fallen flowers and mystery. Back at the inn, he sat in his parked car, unmoving. The pendant, her name, his memory. Something was happening, something he didn't yet understand. But he would find out. He had to. And this time, he wouldn't stop until he had answers. The rain had stopped by the next morning, but Nolan Green's thoughts were still storming. He hadn't slept. Not really. His mind kept circling back to the woman on Lavender Road, Marjorie Ellis, the pendant. The way she had looked at him when he asked about it, guarded, yet almost familiar. It had shaken him in a way no business deal ever had. He sat at the small desk in his room at the Amberfield Inn, laptop open, phone in hand. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft patterns on the wall. But all he could focus on was the feeling in his chest, the tightness that came with realizing something he'd always believed might be wrong. His assistant, Mia, called him at 7:15 a.m. sharp. "You missed your meeting yesterday," she said. "Are you all right?" Nolan hesitated. "I need you to dig into a name," he said. "Marjorie Ellis, Amberfield, Vermont. Around 70, maybe older. See what you can find." "What exactly am I looking for?" Mia asked. "Everything," Nolan replied, "especially anything connected to children, hospitals, or court records." After hanging up, he stepped outside. The village of Amberfield was peaceful, quiet, and too picturesque to match the weight sitting on his shoulders. He drove into town, following signs to the local library, a place he hadn't stepped inside since college. It was small and smelled like old paper and lavender soap. Behind the counter sat an older woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes. "Morning," she said. "Need help finding something?" "I'm looking into local records," Nolan replied. "From the early 90s. Adoption files, maybe articles. I'm researching a personal matter." "Name?" she asked. "Marjorie Ellis," he said. The woman paused, her gaze narrowing. "She's lived here a long time. Doesn't talk much about her past." "I don't need gossip," Nolan said. "Just facts." "I'm Mrs. Hollis," she said, rising from her chair. "Follow me." She led him to a dusty filing cabinet in a back room. Inside were clippings, public records, and old newsletters. They worked in silence for nearly an hour before Nolan found something that made his breath catch. A photo, dated 30 years ago, Marjorie, much younger, standing in front of a courthouse. In her arms, a small boy with bright green eyes, his eyes. He sat down slowly, the photo trembling in his hand. "That's her," Mrs. Hollis said quietly. "She fought hard for that child." Nolan turned to he. "Fought?" "She petitioned the court multiple times to regain custody. Said the adoption was done without consent. But the papers were sealed. No one around here ever knew the full story." He took the photo and asked for copies of anything related. Back at the inn, he spread the documents across the bed, creating a timeline. Court filings, denial letters, a missing birth certificate. It didn't make sense. How could a woman like Marjorie have a child taken and no one notice? He called Mia again. "Check this too," he said, listing the petition case numbers. "Also, find out anything about Graham Ellis. He was her husband, I think. Maybe tied to Ellis and Barlow Designs. That firm merged with Monarch Structures years ago," Mia responded. "But I'll look into it." While he waited, Nolan drove back to Lavender Road. The flower cart was gone. Marjorie's cottage sat quiet, hidden behind overgrown hedges and climbing ivy. He knocked. No answer. He left a note, tucked in the "We need to talk. It's important." Green by sunset, Mia sent a file to his inbox. It included details from old probate filings. Graham Ellis had co-founded Ellis and Barlow, a firm known for designing sustainable homes in the 80s. After his death, Marjorie had filed bankruptcy. No children were mentioned in his will. No children. But Nolan had been a child. He had the dreams, the memories, the pendant, and now a photograph. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He called Caleb Norris, his longtime head of security. "Caleb, I need you to run a discreet investigation. Look into my own adoption, anything odd, sealed records, gaps, and check Marjorie Ellis. Something doesn't add up." Caleb didn't ask questions. He never did. He just got results. That night, Nolan sat alone in the inn's lounge, sipping black coffee and staring at the pendant he kept in his pocket, the one he'd found in a box years ago when cleaning out a storage unit after his adoptive parents passed away. He'd never questioned where it came from. They told him he was adopted at age 3, that his parents had died in an accident. It had always been simple. Until now. The pendant had a twin, and Marjorie Ellis wore it. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture was still blurry. He needed answers, not guesses. And tomorrow, he planned to get them, no matter what it took. The truth was out there. He could feel it, like a whisper in the wind, and he was ready to listen. The next morning came with a clear sky and a chill that hinted autumn was near. Nolan Green stood outside Marjorie Ellis's cottage, holding the photograph he had found at the library. His hand was steady, but his heart was not. He knocked twice, then once more, firmer this time. The door creaked open. Marjorie stood there in a thick cardigan, her expression guarded. Her eyes flicked down to the envelope in his hand, then back to his face. "I wasn't expecting company," she said softly. "We need to talk," Nolan replied. "Please." Marjorie hesitated for a long moment before stepping aside. "Just for a minute," she said. "I was about to make tea." Inside, the cottage was warm, quiet, and filled with the scent of dried herbs and something sweet baking in the oven. Pressed flowers hung in frames on the walls. The space felt like it belonged to someone who had waited a long time for peace. Nolan sat at the edge of a worn chair, then handed her the photo. "I found this yesterday," he said. "This is you, and that's me, isn't it?" Marjorie's hand trembled as she took the photo. She looked at it without speaking. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Yes," she whispered, "you were mine." The words dropped like stones into silence. Nolan looked down at his hands. He had imagined this moment, but hearing the truth shook him in ways he hadn't prepared for. Why didn't anyone tell me, H? They said my parents died, that no one wanted me. Marjorie sat across from him, her face pale. Your father died in a car crash, she said. I was with him. I survived, barely. I was in the hospital for months. When I woke up, you were gone. Child Services had placed you in a temporary home, but it wasn't temporary for long. Why? His voice was rough. Why couldn't you find me? I tried, Marjorie said, holding his gaze. I hired lawyers, filed petitions. But the people who adopted you, they had power, money. They sealed the records. They erased me. Nolan felt anger rise, sharp and hot. All those years he had lived thinking he had been unwanted, and all the while she had been searching. I have questions, he said. I need the full truth. Marjorie nodded. I'll tell you everything. They sat for hours as she explained it all. Her marriage to Graham Ellis, their love, their work, their son. How her world shattered after the accident. How the courts refused to hear her appeals. How she moved to Amberfield to be near the last place she had heard his name. I volunteered at the shelter nearby, she said, hoping someone would remember you. I sent birthday cards every year to the address they gave me. They were all returned. Nolan looked around the room. In one corner, a wooden box sat on a shelf. He stood and opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, birthday cards, holiday greetings, letters, all unopened, all addressed to him. I never gave up, she said quietly. Nolan's throat tightened. 30 years of missed memories sat in that box. Love that had been locked away without his knowing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his half of the pendant. I kept this, he said. I didn't know why, just that it felt important. Marjorie touched the chain around her neck and slowly removed her matching half. Your father had it made, she said. A family tree, split into two. He wanted you to have one half and me the other. So even if we were ever separated, we'd still be connected. Nolan placed the two halves together. They fit perfectly, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? He asked. I was afraid, Marjorie admitted. Afraid you'd hate me, or worse, that you'd feel nothing at all. Nolan didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what he felt. Grief, anger, disbelief, and under all of it, a sense of something lost, now returned. Outside, the wind stirred the wildflowers in Marjorie's garden. Rows of color danced in the breeze, lavender, daisies, and bright yellow sunflowers. Flowers she had once sold by the roadside, never knowing she'd find her son by accident, on a rainy day, so many years later. What now? He asked quietly. That's up to you, Marjorie said. I don't expect anything, but if you're willing, we could try to know each other again, even for a little while. Nolan looked at the pendant in his hand, then at the woman across from him. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was part of his story. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, standing. We'll talk more. As he stepped outside, the sun dipped behind the hills. The sky turned gold, then deepened into orange. The garden glowed in the evening light. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that still had room to grow. Beneath the wildflowers, a new beginning had quietly taken root. And for the first time in his life, Nolan was ready to see what might bloom. The days that followed moved slowly, as if the world around Nolan and Marjorie had softened its pace to let them catch up on years they had lost. He visited the cottage each morning, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit with her in the garden among the flowers she had tended for decades. The wildflowers had once been her only comfort. Now they became a symbol of something new, reconnection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Marjorie's hands trembled slightly while pouring tea. Nolan noticed. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked. She smiled gently, but didn't answer immediately. "The truth is, I've been managing heart issues for a few years now," she said. "The doctors have done what they can, but it's not something that can be cured." Nolan felt the words land heavily. "How serious?" "Serious enough," she said, her voice calm. "I'm tired, Nolan. I've made peace with that." He looked at her, sitting in the soft glow of the setting sun, a woman who had carried so much pain with such grace. He wasn't ready to lose her, not after just finding her. "You don't have to give up," he said. "I can find someone. There are treatments, trials, specialists. Let me try." Marjorie reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're my mother." The words still felt new on his tongue, but they carried weight. He meant them. Within days, Nolan had arranged a consultation with one of the top cardiologists in the region. Tests were run, options explored. The doctor offered a new treatment, experimental but promising. It would be difficult, and recovery wouldn't be easy. Marjorie hesitated, but Nolan gently insisted. "If there's even a small chance," he said, "we should take it. Not for the past, for now. For whatever time we still have." She agreed. The procedure was scheduled. Nolan cleared his calendar, postponed meetings, and temporarily stepped away from his firm. What once would have felt like a disruption now seemed like the most important decision of his life. The morning of the treatment, Marjorie sat quietly in the hospital room, dressed in a pale gown, her fingers lightly brushing the pendant around her neck. Nolan sat beside her, holding her hand. "If I don't wake up," she whispered, "I need you to know that finding you was enough." Nolan shook his head. "We're not finished. Not yet." She smiled. "You sound like your father." The surgery took hours. Nolan paced the hallway, speaking briefly with nurses, checking his phone for updates, but mostly waiting in silence. He had never felt so powerless. Time stretched, and each passing minute felt like a lifetime. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was tired but hopeful. "She's stable," he said. "The procedure went as well as we could have hoped." Relief flooded through Nolan. He nodded, unable to speak at first. "Thank you," he managed. In recovery, Marjorie looked pale but peaceful. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. Nolan sat by her side, eyes fixed on her face. He thought about everything that had brought them here. The accident on Lavender Road, the pendant, the forgotten records. Each moment had felt small on its own, but together they had changed everything. The next few weeks were a mix of progress and setbacks. Marjorie regained strength slowly. Some days she could walk around the garden. Other days she rested for hours. Nolan remained close, dividing his time between her care and something else, a quiet project he had started in the background. He used his resources to establish a nonprofit foundation in Marjorie's name, one dedicated to helping families reconnect after separation through adoption, loss, or legal barriers. The mission was simple: no family should be kept apart by secrets, power, or silence. They called it the Ellis Green Foundation for Family Healing. When Marjorie learned about it, she was overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," Nolan replied, "because what happened to us shouldn't happen to anyone else." Spring returned to Amberfield with blooming trees and softer winds. The wildflower garden around Marjorie's cottage had never looked more beautiful. Birds nested near the porch, and butterflies floated lazily over fresh blossoms. Marjorie sat in her favorite chair, wrapped in a light shawl, a cup of tea in hand. Nolan joined her, carrying a small box. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a new pendant, An exact replica of the original, but whole. Polished silver, shaped like a complete tree. Its branches connected. "The old ones are too delicate," he said. "This is something new for both of us. Together." Marjorie touched the necklace with a trembling hand. Her eyes filled with quiet joy. On the back, engraved in small letters, were the words, "What was once lost is now found." That evening, as the sun set over the hills and cast golden light over the garden, Nolan sat beside his mother. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared. The years apart couldn't be erased, but something else had grown in its place. Understanding, connection, peace. The truth had once been hidden, buried beneath silence and time. Now it bloomed, like the wildflowers that danced in the breeze. What they had was not perfect, but it was real. And for both of them, what remained was more than enough.